Good morning. I want to introduce to you just briefly the family Pleomassariaceae of the Pleosporales Dotidiomycetes. When I said yesterday that the Dotidiomycetes are a mess, I meant in particular that numerous genera and families are still solely defined by morphological data. Kevin Hyde said yesterday that morphology is essential, and I want to specify that morphology is indispensable when you want to identify, re-identify recollected material, especially of fungi which are already described, and you want to determine their phylogenetic relationships. And that's what we, Hermann Voglmayr, my colleague, and I are doing for several years now. And my current project is on Cucurbitariaceae in a wide sense, which proves to be a real challenge. Then the genus Versaria, the respective paper will appear very soon. And then the Pleomassariaceae. This family was described by Margaret Barr in 1979, based on Pleomassaria and two more genera, Asteromassaria and Splanchnonemur. In 1982, she gave an account of 24 species, many of which were earlier classified in Massaria. She wasn't sure whether to retain these three genera or put all species just in a single genus. In 1993, she synonymized Pleomassaria with Splanchnonemur, but also accepted the three genera Eopyrenula, Kirsteiniotelia, and Macroversaria in the family. These three genera are currently not considered to belong in the family. The fungi assigned to this family are usually host-specific. Teleomorphs are characterized by rather large, more or less globose escomata, immersed in or sometimes rampant from bark of dicotyledonous trees and shrubs. By broad pseudobarophysis, broad oblong physiotunicate essae with ascospores in more or less biseriate arrangement, by ascospores that are usually rather large, mostly brown, often asymmetric, mostly multicellular, often distaseptate, also sometimes punctate, verruculous, or striate, and they are surrounded by a gelatinous sheet. Anamorphs are known only for a small number of species. They are usually acervular or pycnidial Coelomycetes in the genera Macrodiplodiopsis, Mixocyclus, Neohendersonia, Prostemium, Scolicosporium, and Scheria or similar genera. But some anamorphs are also hyphomycetes. Most of them are Helminthosporium-like. Just a short sketch of ascospores. At the left, spores which are nearly symmetric in Asteromassaria. Then Dictyosporous and often distaseptate spores in Pleomassaria, and usually distinctly asymmetric phragmospores in Splanchnonemur. Examples here are Splanchnonemur loricatum, Argus, and Phosioides. Conidia in the Pleomassariaceae are extremely diverse. At the left, Macrodiplodiopsis in nature and in culture. Then Helminthosporium, Prostemium, Neohendersonia, Scolicosporium, Scheria or Kaleidosporium. We are still finding out what's the right name here, Mixocyclus. And now I hand over to Hermann Voglmayr, which will tell us the awful truth about the phylogenetic relationships in this so-called family.
Okay. So we started some years ago an intense collection effort of as many species as possible to include and disentangle how they are phylogenetically related, as they appear on the first sight, you have seen this before, to be morphologically quite homogeneous. So we prepared over the years, collected and prepared and isolated and cultivated and extracted, etc., about 150 collections of about 35 species, which are assignable to the Pleomassariaceae in the sense of Bar. So we cultivated them from both ascospores and conidia, if available, to confirm the connection of the sexual and asexual states. And we analyzed our data, our multi-gene data, with more than 200 Pleosporales accessions from the multi-gene matrix of Hyde et al. From 2013 of the families of Dothidiomycetes. And not unexpectedly, as we have heard from many groups of ascomycetes, also in the Pleomassariaceae, it turns out that neither the family Pleomassariaceae nor the three genera mentioned before are monophyletic, but they fall into about 10 different clades within the Pleosporales. So when we connected this data, second important finding with the anamorphs, we found out that the anamorphs in some cases may be more indicative for the phylogenetic relationships than the teleomorphs, which appear to be morphologically quite conserved. So this is the brief results of our phylogenetic analysis, condensed tree. Of course, you cannot present so many species in detail. I have here labeled the different families recognized by Hyde et al. In the various clades. You see the red clades, they contain species referable to Astromassaria, Splenchionema, or Pleomassaria in the sense of Bar. And here we see, for instance, the genus Splenchionema, where we have the various species placed. You see, we have them in the Massarinaceae. We have them also some separate clades which are not yet referable to a family, like for Splenchionema platani, and also a new family Splenchionemataceae with the type genus type species of Splenchionema in the Pleomassariaceae, and also some isolated lineages which also cannot be classified for the moment as in a family, as they fall outside the commonly accepted families in the tree. The same is true for Pleomassariaceae. Also, they are divided in various families. So one in Montagnulaceae, and in also another isolated lineage, Pleomassaria acericola. And in Cucurbitariaceae, we also have found new species which morphologically match Pleomassaria in the sense of Bar. And also in the Splenchionemataceae and in the Pleomassariaceae, and a few other additional lineages, isolated lineages. For Asteromassaria, there are not so many species described. We have 3 species which fall in 3 different clades. Again, Massarinaceae and Pleomassariaceae, and an isolated lineage, a lone lineage, which also cannot be classified currently in one of the described families. A few details of a few of these lineages. For instance, in the Massarinaceae, we have here identified 2 Splenchionema species which are labeled in blue, and 1 Asteromassaria species. One species is closely related to or embedded within the Helminthosporium clade, typified by Helminthosporium velutinum, and it also has an Helminthosporium anamorph, so this one needs to be combined in Helminthosporium. And then we have outside this Helminthosporium clade 2 species, one Splanchionema, one Astromassaria species which have pycnidial anamorphs with higher line conidia. The Pleomassariaceae by themselves, they contain, in the traditional sense, contain all three genera, species of all three genera. One, Astromassaria, the type species of Astromassaria, which is also the type species of Scolicosporium, and we will classify it as Scolicosporium. It is the older name, and it is also the more well-known name. So this will be Scolicosporium in future. Then Stigmatomassaria, several species which formerly were also classified in Splanchionema, but we will take up the name Stigmatomassaria, which has been published in the 50s. They have a Petrarchia anamorph, but these Petrarchia anamorphs are not congeneric with the type of Petrarchia, so we will classify them in Stigmatomassaria. And Pleomassaria sensu stricto, which already has been well examined by Tanaka, who already used the name Prostemium for the anamorph name for the genus, and we will also retain this, so this will in future be Prostemium with these nice stellate spores. A new family is Splanchionemaceae, which contains the generic type species of the generic type species of Splanchionema and Splanchospora, a segregate former years ago by Vasilyeva, and Kaleidosporium, and also new species of Pleomassaria. So the anamorph genera, they are very variable. They have been confirmed by culture studies and by sequencing to belong to these species. And so we will take up the anamorph names, as already mentioned by Walter, for the classification in future for these species. We unfortunately don't have yet the type of the genus Scheria, but we are confident that it may be closely related to the species we have included here. So as a conclusion, the generic as well as the familial classification of bar cannot be retained. The genera have to be split. The conidial morphology and ontogeny is commonly more indicative of the phylogenetic relationships than the ascospores, especially in these groups which contain many species. And following telomorph genera shall be used Splanchionema, Splanchospora, and Stigmatomassaria, and the anamorph genera Helminthosporium, Macrodiplodiopsis, Myxocyclus, Prostemium, Scolicosporium, and Scheria. However, several new genera need to be described to accommodate those species falling outside these clades, and several new species also need to be described, which have been detected in our studies, which is nothing new for Ascomycetes altogether, which we know contain many undescribed species. So thank you for your attention.